Well, all right, so we're up to the book of Colossians. The book of Colossians is also composed by Paul, also around the same kind of time, the last couple of letters we've talked about, AD 60. Paul is in prison also, same situation it seems like he was in Philippians, with the letter of the Philippians. This is in prison, more likely in Rome. Within the balance of the book of Colossians, Colossians has a very elevated talk about Jesus Christ as the Lord of creation and the new creation. If you look at Colossians chapter 1 with me and turn to verse 15, this is a really prominent passage concerning the glory and the majesty of Jesus. And so if you look there, I will find it as well and start reading. Here we go. Chapter 115. He is the image, and he is Jesus. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. So a couple of things. Obviously the nature of Jesus as God, the image of the invisible God, kind of goes back to the way that we talk about idols back in the Old Testament. If you remember, I was quite a few lectures ago, but that the idea was that the God infused himself, or was in the idol itself, so that you had a metal idol. The metal idol didn't actually represent the God. That metal actually in your mind was the God. So you appealed to that idol, you were appealing to that God. The God had infused himself and his presence in the idol. And so instead of a deity wrapping himself in metal or wood, in Christianity, the deity wraps himself in flesh, and in fact is the person of Jesus Christ. A couple of things to note: firstborn over all creation. Now, how exactly are you the firstborn of all creation, and also the Creator? That kind of thing seems to be odd. The firstborn of all creation simply means the inheritor. So the firstborn of all creation is like the firstborn of some house. The firstborn of the house means that you're the primogenitor. You get to inherit all that the Father has. And this was the way that Paul utilized this text here: firstborn over all creation and firstborn from the dead. So the inheritor of life and the inheritor of all creation. This is the way that Paul tends to use this particular idea, and then it's modified by what's said after that. By Jesus, all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones, dominions, rulers, or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. And so it's Jesus' preeminence that matters in these references to firstborn, and references to him as Lord and God over all creation and new creation, as well as head of the church. And so this this also has practical kind of meaning for the people in Colossians that are being written to in Colossians. Verse 21, the Gentiles that are now Christians in Colossae, you who were once alienated and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds, he is now reconciled in his body of flesh by his death, in order to present you holy and blameless and above reproach before him. So the idea is that that these people who were once alienated, hostile, in their flesh, and that's encompassing everything, the body, the mind, the will, everything in their flesh, that Jesus now has reconciled them to God through his own death on the cross. And so this is what the Lord, what the King does, right? The King goes and sacrifices himself in order to rescue and reconcile. And this brings up the next major theme is the sufficiency of Jesus for salvation. So if you look at chapter 2, beginning in verse 1, or actually let's drop down to verse 6. Therefore, as you received Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk in him, rooted and built up in him, and established in the faith, just as you were taught, abounding in thanksgiving. See to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ. For in him the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily, and you have been filled in him, who is the head of all rule and authority. In him also you were circumcised with a circumcision made without hands, by putting off the body of flesh by the circumcision of Christ. Say that's not an actual circumcision, a physical circumcision rather, as a circumcision done without hands in your heart. Deuteronomy actually talks about that in chapter 12. Having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised with him through faith in the powerful working of God who raised him from the dead, and you who were dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made alive together with him, having forgiven us all our trespasses by canceling the record of debt that stood against us and with its legal demands. This he set aside, nailing it to the cross. He disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame by triumphing over them in him. So the idea of that last image is when an army would come in and dominate the rulers of a particular country. They would march them around in the city naked and shame them, demonstrating to the people that they were weak and that they were now subjected to this new king. So Jesus does this to the rulers and authorities, and the rulers and authorities here are similar to the ones that we bumped into in Ephesians. They're not earthly guys. They're not. There's something immaterial about them, and death, decay, the demonic, all of those things sort of fall under the auspices of that. Jesus becomes completely and utterly sufficient for salvation as well as for sanctification. Look at beginning in verse 16. Therefore, let no one pass judgment on you. So since you're saved, let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food and drink, or with regard to a festival or a new moon or a Sabbath. These are a shadow of things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. Let no one disqualify you insisting on asceticism and worship of angels, going into detail about visions, puffed up without reason by a sensuous mind, and not holding fast to the head, from whom the whole body, nourished and knit together through its joints and ligaments, grows with a growth that's from God. If with Christ you died to the elemental spirits of the world, why, as if you were still alive in the world, do you submit to regulations, such as do not handle, do not taste, do not touch, referring to things that all perish as they're used, according to human precepts and teaching? These have indeed an appearance of wisdom. These ideas of restricting you from tasting and touching have an appearance of wisdom in promoting self-made religion and asceticism and severity to the body, but they're of no value in stopping the indulgence of the flesh. If then you've been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things that are above, not on things that are on the earth. For if you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God, and when Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. So the idea is, sanctification doesn't have as much to do with you denying yourself things like food and drink and things of this nature. In fact, he says actually doing those things can't stop the indulgence of the flesh. That sounds weird, doesn't it? Because it seems like that if you stop those things, that would by definition be stopping the indulgence of the flesh. But Paul says, no, it's not actually. In fact, those people who live and die by a righteousness that's kind of resultant from not doing these things end up indulging their flesh and their own self-righteousness and pride. In other words, it's impossible to dominate and win spiritual battles by doing little religious things. And Paul's idea is Christ is sufficient for sanctification, for growth. Christ is sufficient for pushing the flesh aside, and in order to do that, you set your mind, what he says, on heavenly things, on earthly things. So you set your mind on the reign of Jesus, and when you set your mind on the reign of Jesus, you follow it up with verses 5 through 4, verse 1. You live as new creations. That can't be even a remote surprise to you now after going through this. He says, therefore put to death, because you set your things on Christ, put to death what's earthly in you. Sexual immorality, internal. Impurity, internal. Passion, internal. Evil desire, internal. Covetousness, internal. All which is idolatry. On account of these things, the wrath of God is coming. In these too you once walked when you were living in them, but now you must put them all away. With anger, wrath, malice, slander, obscene talk from your mouth. That's the only one that's actually external. And even that, if you go back to Romans chapter 3, is tied to something internal. So all this is internal. And so the idea of sanctification isn't trying to, I'm Southern Baptist, and so it's the idea that you don't smoke and you don't drink alcohol and you have your hair cut a particular way. None of that actually might have anything to do with sanctification. It has less to do with sanctification and more to do with just religious compliance. And Paul says none of that actually cures anything. And so the things that Paul is interested in you curing are internal, and that takes reliance on the Spirit, reliance on Christ, and through the grace of Christ, the power of the Spirit, you willfully can put these things away. And by putting them away, what he means is they begin to decline significantly in value. So sex doesn't decline in value, but sexual immorality declines in value. Impurity and passion and evil desire declines in value. Covetousness declines in value. Not ambition, but covetousness declines in value. That kind of thing. So it's things that are internal, and those things are internal. Anybody that's ever tried to, just to at least even be honest with themselves for a moment knows that religious practice can't control those things. And so, and Paul, of course, makes that very clear in the book of Colossians. Well, here's your outline. So I want you to run through it as you're reading. As you're reading, look at the outline. The sufficiency of Christ explained, the sufficiency of Christ denied, beginning in chapter 2, and the sufficiency of Christ experienced. Really excellent outline, and one that will help you move forward in your readings. Super excellent book. I hope you enjoy it as you read it.